He called himself rage personified. A man who, by his own admission, hated the human race and left destruction in his wake. But how does someone become so consumed by anger, so filled with hatred, that their very name becomes synonymous with evil? This is the story of Carl Panzram, one of America's most terrifying killers. And to understand the monster, we first have to uncover the boy he once was. Carl Panzram was born on June 28, 1891 in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, to a family of poor Prussian immigrants. Life on the Panzram farm was hard, but it was more than just the toil of rural life that made Carl's childhood so bleak. From the moment he could walk, Carl was surrounded by hardship, abuse and cruelty. The Panzram family farm was a place of endless work and little joy. Carl was one of several siblings, but the family's poverty and his father's eventual abandonment only deepened their struggles. When Carl was just 7 years old, his father walked out on the family, leaving his mother, Matilda, to care for the children alone. For a young boy like Carl, this abandonment planted the first seeds of distrust and resentment. Life at home didn't offer Carl much solace. His mother, overwhelmed and overworked, had little time for warmth or affection. Discipline in the Panzram household was harsh and unrelenting. Carl and his siblings were expected to work long hours on the farm, often beyond their physical capacities. Any mistakes were met with severe punishments, not just scoldings, but physical beatings that left both physical and emotional scars. Carl's mother, though burdened by her circumstances, was described as cold and stern. There was no room for tenderness or understanding in their home. To Carl, this lack of affection reinforced the idea that the world was a harsh and unforgiving place. As his anger grew, so did his defiance, creating a vicious cycle where his rebellious behaviour only provoked harsher and harsher punishments. Carl's resentment began to fester, pushing back against authority wherever he could, but his rebellion only made things worse. At age 11, Carl's life took a terrible turn when he was sent to the Minnesota State Training School, a reform institution for troubled boys. Instead of finding guidance or rehabilitation, Carl encountered something far more sinister. The school, intended to correct boys like Carl, operated more like a place of punishment and suffering. The staff at the training school ruled through fear and violence. Physical punishments were routine, and the boys were often beaten for the slightest infractions. Carl, who was already harbouring a deep-seated anger, became a frequent target of this brutality. But the abuse didn't stop there. The environment was rife with exploitation and mistreatment, with some staff members using their authority to prey on the boys in their care, using them for their own sadistic gratification. Obviously, this type of behaviour from the staff was far beyond punishment, and for Carl, it was a profound betrayal. He later described the training school as a place where his hatred for humanity began to solidify. He learned to distrust everyone, especially those in positions of power. The abuse he endured taught him that the world operated on cruelty and domination, and he began to see violence as the only way to survive. By the time Carl left the training school, he was no longer just an angry and defiant boy. He was filled with a bitterness and rage that would follow him for the rest of his life. The seeds of his later actions had been planted, watered by years of suffering and betrayal. He had developed an intense hatred for authority and all of humankind. He'd also learned to manipulate, deceive, and lash out in response to the cruelty he had endured. Upon his release, Carl drifted from place to place, committing petty crimes to survive. But each arrest, each encounter with the law, seemed to fuel his growing rage. He was sent to jail multiple times as a teenager, each stint reinforcing his belief that the world was a cruel and unjust place. By his late teens, Carl was caught in a vicious cycle of crime and incarceration. Every time he was released from jail, he seemed to sink deeper into his hatred and violent tendencies. He began targeting people he saw as symbols of authority or privilege, acting out his vendetta against the society that had failed him. But it wasn't just petty crimes and theft that made Carl Panzram infamous. His rage escalated into acts of, to say the least, extreme violence. Over the course of his life, Panzram claimed responsibility for the murders of 21 people. However, he is suspected of having killed more than 100 boys and men in the United States alone, and several more in Portuguese Angola. Anywhere that Carl went, he left a trail of devastation in his wake. His victims included sailors, workers, kids, and any other individuals he saw as easy targets. Beyond murder, Panzram was responsible for countless robberies, acts of arson, and assaults, crimes he carried out with a chilling lack of remorse. He confessed to having committed more than 1,000 acts of SA against males of all ages as he rampaged through his adult life. He was a man not driven by profit or necessity, but by an intense desire to cause pain and destruction. For Carl, these crimes were not just about violence. He saw them as justified acts of revenge against a world he believed had wronged him. Each act was a declaration of his hatred for this world and the system that had failed to protect him as a child. Carl Panzram's early life was a perfect storm of neglect, abuse, and betrayal. From his father's abandonment to the brutality of the Minnesota State Training School, every experience seemed to strip away bits of his humanity, leaving behind a creature filled with rage and a desire for destruction. But while Carl's actions as an adult were absolutely unforgivable, understanding his early life offers us a glimpse into the making of a killer. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about how much of his violence was born from nature and how much was shaped by the cruelty he endured. It also begs the question, how many monsters did Carl create? How many lives did he ruin? How many families destroyed? How many children had their innocence and happiness stolen? How many people did Carl cause to lose their faith in humanity as he rained terror, pain, and suffering down upon the world? Unleashing his demons must have certainly created some new ones. Carl Panzram's story is not just one of violence and hatred, it's a cautionary tale about the devastating impact of abuse, neglect, and unchecked rage. While the crimes he committed remain some of the most brutal and horrifying in history, his early life serves as a stark reminder of the importance of compassion, guidance, and accountability. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support gives me the inspiration to continue creating content, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Together we can continue exploring the dark stories behind some of the world's most terrifying people. And remember, behind every monster lies a story. Until next time.